Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's largest platform for anything and everything related to MSMEs, SMEs, startups, and for anyone that is aspiring to turn entrepreneur, and for almost every Indian that is wanting to look at money differently. I'm Sumit Lakhotia, and every Tuesday we bring you a special look at managing your finances as an entrepreneur, and even if you're an everyday Indian trying to get more bang from your buck. This week, we're focusing on freelancers and gig economy workers. So with the boom in the service industry over the last many years, it's important for freelancers to know how to manage their cash flow and investments. And for that, we have two experts lined up on the show who will be sharing their guidance for you. Hemant, Rustagi, the CEO of Wiseinvest Private Limited, will share his thoughts on how freelancers can get the most bang from their buck. And founder and CEO of Phenology, Pranjal Kamra, talks about why it's important for gig workers to know the basics of personal finance, even if their line of work is far from the world of numbers. But before that, here are some developments that have taken place in the last few days that you need to know. I'm now in conversation with Hemant Rustagi, the CEO of Wiseinvest Private Limited. Now, Hemant is a veteran of the mutual fund and personal finance industry with over 2 decades of experience in guiding people to better manage their money. Hi, Hemant. Thanks for coming on the show. Let's start off. While we're talking about freelancers and people in the gig economy, getting loans is tough for them. How should they manage because they don't have a salary slip? What's your advice on how they can work around it?
Yes, Sumit, if you look at one of the biggest aspirations that all of us have, including the freelancer as well as those who are working in the gig economy, is buying a house. And we also know that this is our biggest investment that we make. And invariably, is buying a house, and we also know that this is our biggest investment that we make, and invariably most of us require a loan. And as you rightly mentioned, it can be a little tough for those who are freelancers or those working in the gig economy to get a loan. When you're talking about such a big loan, what I have observed is that the public sector banks are a bit rigid in terms of giving loans to these two segments. Whereas some of the private sector banks are quite open. In fact, I've seen that some of the private sector banks offer a special service wherein, they give you expert advice on various issues relating to the housing loan. And all that require is basically your ID proof and your, ITR for the last 2-3 years. So once you are able to give them an also 6-month bank account statement, you can get the loan from them. So yes, it is a bit tough, but it's not impossible. One has to work kind of a little hard, look at options, but like I said, there are options available to take loan even for freelancers as well as those working in the gig economy.
Super. Now, Hemant, we'll take a couple of steps back. So as what we say, the tenets, the main important parts of personal finance planning is always first about creating kind of a emergency fund. So let's talk about that. How would you guide freelancers on what is the amount that they should keep in a emergency fund, and how should they go about accumulating that?
Well, I think this is a very important aspect. This is what we call the risk management. In fact, there are 2 aspects to it. One is the insurance, which includes the life insurance as well as the health insurance. And the second part is, creating an emergency reserve. We know that, the freelancers do not have regular income. They can be issued in terms of, the kind of income that they make, and they can be irregular income. In fact, why only these 2 segments? I would say even for those who are getting regular income, should be creating an emergency reserve. It helps you in tackling, some kind of financial emergencies. We have seen that in the, COVID-19 times. There have been difficult times. The income has not been there. So emergency fund is something that allows you to not only maintain your lifestyle, but also making sure that you're not getting disturbed in terms of your financial requirement. Now, so what we are saying is that you must have an emergency reserve. Second important aspect is it must be adequate. So generally speaking, it should be around 6 months, equivalent to 6 months of your expenses. And when I'm talking about expenses, I'm not talking about only household expenses. I'm talking about all the financial commitment that you may have, the fee for the children education, if you're paying any EMI, your household expenses, any kind of expenses. Maybe it should not include discretionary expenses to that extent, but definitely expenses which are must be there should be taken care of. So you have adequate in 6 months, like I said. And then if your income is highly volatile, then I would recommend that make it for at least equivalent to 12-month expenses. Third important aspect of emergency fund is that it should be easily accessible. The last thing you want to do is that something that you put aside and you're invested in the equity market, and whenever there is a requirement for that, then you see the markets becoming volatile or markets down. This is not a kind of situation that you would like to face. So have an emergency fund, have adequate emergency fund, and put it in the option where it is easily accessible. For example, you can put it in your bank account, bank short-term FD, or some of the options from the mutual funds like funds. So these are the options that you can consider for parking your emergency fund.
Super. Hemant, one other angle which is different for freelancers is their tax component. So as a salaried individual, they know the amount of tax, the company cuts in some amount of TDS. What's your advice for freelancers? How should they manage tax payouts or preparing for tax payouts?
Well, I think this is a very important aspect for freelancers. I think it should all begin with, separating your income and your personal expenses. So my recommendation always is that many times what we've seen is the freelancers will maintain only one saving account. So the income also comes there, expenses also, the personal expenses and the business expenses, they all get mixed up. I think it's very important maybe to look at opening a current account and opening a saving bank account. Okay, let the income come in the current account, and you can draw money from there as your salary. So you can pay yourself salary every month so that your personal expenses are, separated from your business expenses. It's important for you to be aware of what are the tax benefits which are available to you as a taxpayer individually. Also, what are the expenses that can be claimed as business expense, because that's equally important. We all know that if you are earning on your own, you have to pay advance tax. So be aware of the fact that you need to pay advance tax, and it's equally important. We talked about creating an emergency fund. Many times when the earning is there, we need to always remember this, that we have to pay tax on that. Okay, and there is a pattern in which you have to pay advance tax. Follow that. Keep that money aside. Make sure that you have the money available to you when you have to pay tax. So, keep your expenses separately, maintain everything separately, and pay your taxes in time to avoid any kind of penalty or any interest which you may have to pay later.
Absolutely. Hemant, one last question to you on credit cards. What's your thoughts on credit cards? Because for freelancers, so one angle of credit cards is, yes, it can help in an emergency, but of course people have to be careful that it shouldn't be too far beyond the due date, because the interest on credit cards can be really heavy. So how can freelancers maybe use this or use it in a regulated fashion? What's your advice to them?
Definitely requires some amount of discipline. If as a freelancer you're able to get a credit card, it's a good thing to have. It also helps you build a credit history. That if you're paying your credit card bills properly at time, it helps you in building up a credit history. But you have to be very, very careful, because sometimes you can get carried away by thinking it's easy money, because you have a certain amount of limit and you feel that even if the income is now, that it will come later on, let me spend today and I can pay later. I think this is how you get into a debt trap. It's very, very important that having a credit card can be very, very useful for more than one reason. But it's equally important to ensure that you're not overspending. You're not, kind of using it as an easy money. And that will come only from the discipline. And I think it's very important, again, if you want to avoid a situation like this, to follow some kind of budgeting. Okay, while you may not be, in a position to kind of estimate as to how the income will come, how much will come, but I'm sure you can control your expenses. So if you control your expenses, you will never get into a situation where you have to use, revolving credit on the credit card, which can be very, very expensive. And like I said, can actually result in you falling into a debt trap. So certain amount of discipline is required in how you use your credit card.
Thank you for talking to us, Hemant. On that note, it's time for a short break. And on the other side, Pranjal Kamra of Phenology talks to us about how gig workers should educate themselves about managing their finances. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.